We're excited to have a guest today. We're going to get to that in just a second. But about 6 weeks ago, we started doing a series that we called How to Stay Sane When Working from Home. And it was some tips and tricks about working from home. And we had guests, and we're kind of learning how to sort out our work from home strategy and our new normal for ourselves and our customers. But now we get to talk about how we make a comeback. There's a lot of people that are eager to get back to work and businesses that are ready to reopen. And we want to help our clients do that. So this is on how to make a comeback. Specifically today, we want to talk about law firms, law practices. So what are you going to do in the next 30 days to be efficient and productive as we all try to get back to work? Many states are reopening, and we want to do that in a smart way. We want to get our staff up and going as quickly as possible and make good sense of what's changed in the last 6 or 8 weeks that our practices and our IT and all these different things have been happening from home. So I'm so excited to have a guest today, Rich Kenney. He's the co-founder of a company called Tech Solutions, and they are located in Wilmington, Delaware, and he has some guests on the call today too. So we're excited to have folks from Texas and folks from Delaware on the call. So Rich, thanks for joining.
Oh, thank you, Douglas. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's an honor to be part of this. So thank you very much for inviting me. So I'm excited about the topic.
I met Rich a couple of years ago in a peer group organization that we're both part of, where IT companies get together and try to learn and try to grow and collaborate on different things. And one thing I know about Rich is a thinker. And so when I got ready to start to talk about how do we help our law firms that we service get back up and going and how they start to work, I reached out to Rich, and we started talking about how do you help a law firm and a practice get kind of put back together after all of this. So Rich has deep knowledge about the law industry and how practices are supposed to function and how the technology inside those practices function. Very knowledgeable. And so I thought he'd be a great guest to have on today and talk through some of the things. So he and I started talking just in general, and I said, man, this would make great information for us to get out to our clients. What's a great way to do that? And so we decided to kind of put together this webinar and have that happen. So, he's in Delaware, I'm in Texas. And in Texas, we already see some things starting to open up. People are starting to try to get back and go to work in their office. Some of our restrictions have been lifted. And so people are trying to navigate that. And Rich, if I'm right, Delaware is kind of about to get to that point. Is that kind of the understanding I have?
Sort of. The governor is sort of wishy-washy on whatever dates he's throwing around. The last date I heard was May 15th. We'll start to get back, relax some of the restrictions. So it's coming.
Sure. So the timing of us kind of helping our clients get sorted out what it's going to look like, this is great timing. One thing that we talked about with our own teams was the move to work from home was very abrupt and kind of chaotic, and we didn't really have a lot of time to plan. It was kind of it was a crisis. We had to solve the crisis, get through it, and get everybody to be able to function from home. One of the benefits we have now, though, is as people plan to go back to work, we can do it with a little more, we can be a little more intentional. We can plan, we can help our clients think through some of the issues they're going to run into ahead of time. That's what I want to do right now. I think this timing is great, that we can, as people start to go back, that we can talk through some of the things that we know that they're going to run into. So we're great timing for us to go through these things together. So I guess first things first. So, Rich, in your opinion, who is the top priority to return to work inside the office?
Well, I think one of the main pieces to keep in mind here is that when we left and we went remote, coming back, I don't see it all going back to normal. So what ends up happening is the law firm is not quite as efficient at home as they were in the office for a variety of reasons, and I'll get to that in just a second. But when we actually come back and on a full-time basis, I don't see it going back to the way it was 6 months ago. What I do see is sort of a hybrid model where you've got some people working from home and some people working in the office. But to answer your question, Douglas, about the sort of the top priority to return to the office, I think what we're talking about is dividing the law firm and the legal uh, office into roles. And so, if you just think through some of the roles that are involved in a law firm, you've got partners, you've got associates, you've got support staff, you've got managerial staff or administration staff. And I think if you just look at the roles, that's where we can decide who comes back first, who's the top priority to come back first. And I think one of the main roles that would make sense to come back into the office first would be the support staff, the secretarial staff, the individuals who are in charge of copying and scanning and the dictation and more of the physical aspect of the way a law firm or a legal office works. I think the physical aspect is one of the main things that's been missing during the work from home piece of this puzzle.
Yeah, that's definitely been a challenge. When you don't have the same kind of access to the office that you did before, there's things that are just so much more difficult to do from home. That's absolutely true. One of the other things you and I talked about a little bit was every practice is they're all kind of the same, but then they're all kind of unique also. And so based on the personalities of the people, there might be some folks that are really eager to get back into the office and get back to normal. And there might be some people that might be a little more reserved and maybe okay working from home a little longer. What are some of the challenges that you think that a practice is going to face when they look at, like, some of the staff is back in the office 100% and some of the staff isn't, or maybe some of the staff is back 50%? What are some of the things that they're going to have to adjust and deal with as they come back?
So I think the biggest thing is the adjustments to the workflow. Now, we've already had an adjustment to the workflow processes that are out there because of the work from home part, but they're just going to have to adjust just a little bit more as people start going back into the office. For example, the attorneys communicating with the support staff. I foresee more of a dependence, like we've seen in the past month or so, more of a dependence on the chat programs that are out there, perhaps Microsoft Teams, if they're an Office 365 shop. And one more thing that I was going to say there was another challenge might be childcare. So it's kind of, I'm not sure if that's an appropriate time to bring that up or not, but I think childcare concerns are relevant to this conversation because, at least in Delaware, I don't see daycares opening up anytime soon. So those employees, attorneys, support staff alike, those attorneys who used to drop their children off at daycare first thing in the morning and then pick them up after work, at the end of the day, I don't think that's going to be an option anymore. So the employer, the law firms, they need to be a little bit more flexible, or at least consider their level of flexibility in terms of bringing people back into the office. But one more thing I wanted to say about the top priority to return to the office is some of the partners. In my experience, there's a generation of partners or older attorneys especially, who really, really prefer the feel of a piece of paper and a highlighter and a pen, and they make changes to documents with their hands as opposed to with the computer. And I think that's another physical aspect of the people who are going to want to come back into the office sooner rather than later as well. So.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we're going to see different needs across the different partners, associates, and support staff. Wide age range, potential stage of life differences that everybody's going to have to kind of contend with, and depending on what their childcare situation is, they might have had some freedom right now working from home that they might not have be able to go back to normal when they're ready to go back in the office. I think that's true, and I can think of a couple of our clients, as you were talking about, of this couple of specific clients where I know they like paper. I know they like to be in their office. That's where they're comfortable working. it's a hard
Mm-hmm.
habit to break. And so I sense that those folks are going to want to get back into the office as quick as they can. Um, what are some of the other sort of needs or the things that the practice might want to change? Some things we know that, hey, we know this is going to be different when they come back. They're going to need to change this or that as they come back into the office. What are some of those things that we know are going to have to change when they come back to work?
Well, I think one thing you really have to keep in mind during this part of the discussion is sort of um, the guidelines that the CDC is putting forth through social distancing and that kind of thing. So are you allowed, or does your office allow you to bring back, you know, 15 people all at the same time, or should you stagger when those 15 people are in the office? Maybe you have shift work. Somebody, this group of employees comes back from, 8 to 12, and this group, and then they leave and go home and work, and this group comes in at 12 to 5. Whatever the situation, I think you need to talk about perhaps thinking of shift work and really just what is your flex policy going to be? What kind of flexibility are you going to allow your staff to take advantage of with regard to getting used to this sort of new normal that we have?
I think this shift idea is really interesting. I have a little bit of an insight here. I have a very good friend that's an air traffic controller, and historically air traffic controllers have these really goofy overlapping schedules. And they came back as this started to happen and said, if somebody were to test positive for the virus, we would have a very difficult job deciding how many different people they interacted with and what shifts overlap. So like the FAA right now has air traffic controllers working in these big shifts so they know who's in the office when and who they're in contact with. And not to worry about sort of the fear side of this, but one of the concerns I think every practice should have is if one of their people does ever test positive for the virus, what the outcome of that would be. And you don't want to wipe out the whole office. You don't want to suddenly have to send everybody back home for 14 days or whatever the guideline's going to be. And so we've been talking about this kind of shift idea for a while, and we're actually doing that at Straight Edge right now. We're not all in the office at the same time ever right now, partially for this reason. We don't want to wipe the whole office out at one time. And so as we've been thinking about how we get back to more normal, that's one of the things we've been talking about is limiting the groups of people that are in the office at the same time and being able to pay attention to that. I think, I'm not an expert in the sort of how to control a virus, but I do know that if somebody tests positive for the virus, we're going to have to make some, accommodations for the people that were in contact with the person that might have tested positive. And so we want to know what that might look like. So I think we're absolutely on the same page around talking about sort of shifts, flexible staffing, and
that's a really, really good point. That's a really good point.
What processes inside of a law firm do you think are going to have to change quickly here, as they go to, and I hate this phrase, the new normal, but I don't know what else to call it. It's not going to go back to exactly how it was. It's going to go back to some version of how it was. But what processes need to change in this new version of a law practice during this kind of period?
Well, I think one of the things that the legal administrators of the world are going to have to really come to terms with is what's the best way to manage the staff and manage the employees. There might have been a time clock or online portal that the staff used to punch when they sat down at their desk. How are you going to manage that? How are you going to ensure that people are actually putting in their 8 hours a day? And in addition to that, does anything change around the process for your attorneys and for your paralegals of keeping track of their time? There could be a situation where that procedure has to change within the office because there are people working from home and also people working, on premise. But I think one of the big pieces is the management of the staff. Not to mention what we've already said before is the workflow. So in the 6 months ago, if the attorney had a document that had been edited and it was ready to be retyped, or the changes put into the document or something, that attorney would come out and perhaps hand the document off to one of the support staff. Um, that's not going to happen much anymore if you've got some people at home and some people at the office. So you need to find a new way of doing that, whether it's using a scanner. People get scanners at home, whether it is the attorney starts doing things electronically. I think just the workflow and the communication between the attorney and the staff. So in my experience, attorneys, paralegals, and secretarial staff work together very, very, very closely. And you need to keep in mind that you don't want to break that closeness. They need to have a relationship together that is just like it was 6 months ago, no matter what tools you use to get you there.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, we keep thinking workflow. They've got to make some changes to the workflow. And if there's technology that can help them do that, we want to help them do that. But some of it might just be their own communication and increased communication. That you probably have to work even harder right now to communicate well with the people that are working with you, because they're not around you.
That's right. That's
you know, Rich and I have the benefit. We serve a wide range of clients, not just in law. And this next topic is something that, we don't think it's that big of a thing in law practices, but around kind of office space needs and reconfiguration of offices. We have some clients we work for that have big open bullpens, and they're going to have to make some changes to make those bullpens sort of accommodate, maybe some of the CDC guidelines around coming back to work. But, in your sort of opinion about how most of the practices you work for and support, their office space, do you think there's going to be some configuration that has to happen, or some changes to just physically how things are laid out?
So as I think through our legal clients specifically, most of them have a good 6 to 10 feet of separation between desks. I would say attorneys typically get their own, or have their own office that they can actually shut the door if they wanted to. And then the support staff typically is out in desks and cubicles or something along those lines that are usually at least 6 to 10 feet apart from each other. So I think if you don't have that situation, you really need to consider maybe reconfiguring the desks or the cubicles in your areas. But I think for law firms, one of the big things to consider is the common areas. So, you've got your kitchen, you've got your copy rooms, you've got your conference rooms, you've got the reception area. Those common areas, I really think you need to consider how you're going to adhere to the CDC guidelines and the social distancing rules that are out there. And I'll also say, in terms of the reception area, to me, it's going to take a little bit of thought, but I think you need to limit the amount of guests or the amount of visitors that are in that reception area at any one point in time. And hopefully that can be thought through and everything will be well. But I just think the common areas are where the legal administrators and the decision makers really need to really put some thought as to whether it needs to be reconfigured.
Sure. Like a medical practice, they're used to scheduling for the entire practice and can kind of deal with how many people are in the guest or lobby area. But you're right. Most law firms are not used to having to schedule when someone can come and when someone can't, across the entire firm. It's a good point. Well, so we know there's going to be some challenges with people that come back to work. What are some things that we might decide just should stay remote right now? Because it's easier. It's an easy thing to keep remote and not go through some of the maybe extra effort we'll have to go through to bring people back into the office. What things could stay remote right now that right now stay remote and be easy to keep remote?
So it's funny you bring that up, because I really think that there's a solid group of people out there who really enjoy the work from home piece. That this was I don't want to say the virus, but what happened because of the virus was a welcome change. I get to work from home. I have a lot more flexibility. And so I foresee people wanting to stay home, at least for some of the work week. And so if you consider that, and you consider what aspects of a legal practice might be able to stay at home, I can see new client intake meetings happening over a Zoom call. For example, a personal injury firm might have a car accident victim that they just meet with over Zoom to get the initial information and that kind of thing. So new intake meetings, anything related to litigation, I think, can easily be happening at home. So a lot of the corporate litigation lawyers will use Relativity or some other document review software out there, and that can certainly be done in the in the presence of your own home. Um, and on that same topic, anything having to do with drafting or creating or editing documents. So any sort of document management workflow or processes that you have built into your job can certainly happen at home. Anybody can edit a document while sitting, at their desk in their office at their own house. And then finally, one of the things I like to think through a little bit is reviewing wills, or for the estates and trust lawyers that are out there. If you need to review a will with a client, or some sort of estate plan, that can easily be done with screen sharing technology from Teams or Zoom or GoToMeeting or what have you. And so I think those are, to name just three out of a bunch of things, I think those are a couple things that we could easily leave remote and not have to bring back into the office if we don't want to.
Yeah, great. Because I think, you and I talked, and kind of our next point here is around how you bring the public back in your office. That's when it gets even more complicated. So maybe let's talk a little bit about that, and maybe that'll entice some people to say, maybe we should keep some folks working remotely. It's working right now. Let's not change that right now. So, as people bring their clients back to the office, what are some things that maybe they need to be thinking about around bringing clients back, both like physically in the office, or maybe how they interact with people?
If you go to the grocery store now, or at least in Delaware, you have to wear a mask. They require masks to be in every public place. If you're in a public place, you have to have a mask on, and that is brand new, to this whole thing. And so that's something to consider I think you're going to have to force your visitors and your clients to wear masks. I think that's how it's going to end up going, because we're going to have to follow the same guidelines, or the guidelines that the CDC is putting out. Are we going to be checking temperatures of clients as they walk in the door? Are we going to be limiting how many visitors can be in any, in the reception area at the same time? Maybe as soon as they get there, perhaps the law firm, perhaps you have, 3 or 4 conference rooms. As soon as a guest or a client arrives, you immediately put them into a conference room so that they're out of the reception area. I think you're going to have to supply masks for those people. And are you going to have to supply masks for your staff and your employees as well? And have you ever tried having a business conversation in front of somebody at a conference room table with a mask on? I don't know. And then also one more thing that popped into my head was, how often do you clean? You've got light switches, you've got doorknobs, you've got, people push on doors that can easily be pushed open. You've got keyboards, you've got mice, you've got refrigerator handles. How often do you clean? And these are all things that need to be considered as we're talking about bringing people, especially the public, back into our office.
Mm-hmm. We've talked mostly about sort of process, workflow, some managerial things right now. What is some technology that can be woven in to maybe help some of these things be a little bit easier? So like, let's say we want to reduce some of the client visits to the office. What's maybe some technology that we can use to reduce client visits to the office?
Well, what we've been seeing a big, huge surge in is exactly what we're using right now, which is a video conferencing solution such as Zoom. So Zoom, Teams, GoToMeeting, that is going to be absolutely, you're going to have to implement it into your everyday life, I believe, even going forward. But another thing is, how do you get documents signed appropriately with a notary and so forth? And I think that DocuSign is really going to make a huge leap forward as we move forward. So DocuSign and services that are like DocuSign, but what I find is that DocuSign is sort of the de facto standard as far as what people are using to sign, sign important documents. And then services such as ShareFile, where you're sending important documents from law firm to law firm, or from client to law firm, or vice versa. You're sending important documents around. I think ShareFile and services like the encryption and so forth are just going to take off as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I'm going to put you on the spot here. I didn't know that DocuSign had a notary function, like, until we had this pandemic and we all ended up going home. Is that a pretty easy thing for somebody, the end user, like the notary function of DocuSign? I never would have guessed that that would be a thing, but is that a pretty easy thing for a practice to implement?
So I'm certainly not an expert in that area, but I was talking to one of my clients just the other day, and he said, this was last Friday, he said that they were successfully implementing wills. A lot of people have chosen to update their wills with the pandemic that is going on, and he's been very, very busy creating and updating wills for his clients, and he's been able to successfully get everything signed and in proper order using DocuSign.
Okay, that's good. That's good to know. That's one of those things that, man, for as long as I can remember, that's something that absolutely had to happen in person. And It's kind of amazing that we now have a way to not do that in person. So I want to take 1 second before we get to the last section here. We are going to have a chance for some Q&A at the end. If anybody has a question they'd like to throw at us, go put it into the little Q&A bar that's inside of the Zoom window, and I'll see all those questions and we can get through those questions here at the end. So everybody, if there's some questions that you want to have covered, go ahead and hit that right now so that we can have those in a second. But one of the things that I wanted to make sure we covered today, Rich, your firm and my firm, we have data now of people working from home for the last 4-6 weeks. We don't know how much longer people will be working from home, but frankly, we've seen the challenges that our firms have dealt with during this crisis. And so, you and I both kind of made a list. What are some of the things that we've really seen be a struggle and really had clients deal with the technology challenges right now working from home? I know there's a couple things that we bumped into, but I'll let you kind of share first. What are some of the things that where technology kind of let the person down, and we think that there's some better options out there maybe for people?
Well, across our entire client base, we've got, I don't know the exact number, just call it 2,600 computers under management that we're taking care of right now, or something along those lines. At any rate, in less than a week, or about a week's time, we were given the task of basically getting all of our clients home for their entire staffs. And I think sometimes the solution that was currently, most law firms already had a remote access solution in place. It's just that remote access solution may or may not have had enough horsepower and enough security to handle the entire staff going home, as opposed to just a remote access solution maybe for some of the attorneys or the paralegals who want to get in and work on a Saturday morning or something along those lines. So I think there's a huge difference between being able to get in from home, as we were 6 months ago, versus the entire staff working 8 hours a day from home. And so I think we would want to go back and look at the remote access solutions that we put in place during that week's time, and make sure that it's got enough horsepower and it's got enough security for whatever your needs are going to be going forward. Some other challenges that we've seen out there is the phone system. So we've seen people who or law firms who have simply forwarded their main number to somebody's cell phone, and that person then answers all of the incoming calls on a cell phone, and then sends an email to the attorney or to whoever the message is for saying, please call this person back. That is not sustainable moving forward. You can't have that. So the answer there is voice over IP. So if you wanted to switch to a proper voice over IP system, then you could literally have your office phone wherever you are, and so that's one of the benefits of that. Some other challenges that we've seen is, of course, I've already talked about a little bit, the physical aspects of the way a law firm works, paper, scanners, dictation equipment, copiers, that kind of thing. So that's a challenge, and we'll just have to figure out what the best solution there is. Do you buy a scanner for each of the people who are going to be working a fair amount from home for an ongoing basis? And then speaking of equipment at home, multiple monitors falls into that category as well. A lot of people in the office have multiple monitors, maybe a cockpit worth of three monitors set up in the office, but when they get home, they've just got one little dinky monitor, and it's not the same. And then finally, the other thing I wanted to talk about, because we've had this personally happen to us, is that the employees at home don't have the necessary network infrastructure to maintain, sometimes to maintain a good internet connection. So we've seen Wi-Fi access points at people's houses that literally don't reach the other side of the house, which is maybe where the office is set up. And so the employee is calling us saying, I can't maintain a good connection, a good remote connection to the office. And it's due to the physical distance between the Verizon or the Comcast access point and the office on the other side of the house, and they're just too far apart, and it's not a good connection. So we've seen a lot of that stuff happening in these past 6 weeks.
Yeah, I can echo the same thing that you've experienced with our clients. The home networks have been what was a convenience for someone to work from home in the past. Now that it's a necessity for somebody to work from home, it's a different set of expectations. That's absolutely true, and has been a challenge. We did have a couple questions come in here. One is about from Amy. Thanks, Amy. Suggestions for employee reporting of exposure and the proper procedure for them to follow. So I'll tell you what I know about this topic. So we have some medical practices that are primary care physicians, and those primary care doctors often are the first people that get notified when their patient, if they have a patient that has had exposure, they're the ones that get notified. So what you would tell your people is, if you think you have the virus, call their primary care doctor first, and that's what would get that information out there. From an HR and or legal standpoint, I'm not sure if you can ask them if they have the virus in that way. But I think you would just want to encourage your people to let you know if you've been exposed. So some of the questions that medical practices are asking before they let patients come in are, have you traveled outside of the city or your home for an extended amount of time? Have you been exposed to anybody? Do you have a fever? Do you have some of the symptoms? There's actually, if you look on the CDC website, and maybe we could put this in a post and send it out to everybody on this call, but they give you basically their recommended 6 or 7 questions that you ask somebody. And, I don't see any reason why you couldn't position that information to your firm, your staff, and ask those same questions of your people. And I think you would play on the fact that if you think you've been exposed, we're willing to make some accommodations for you to work from home. So let's get you to work from home so that you don't come expose the rest of us. I think that's another, just looking at how things go back. I know that we have staff that sometimes come to the office when they're sick because they don't know that, or they don't have an alternative, or they don't feel like they have an alternative. And I think that might be something that we change just in our companies, is allowing people a little bit of flexibility when they're sick to stay home to keep from getting the rest of us sick. That's just something that I know that happens in our office. People are sometimes less likely to call in sick because they don't want to lose the day of work, or they don't want to use the PTO, or for some other reason they feel like they have to come in. And in a situation like this, when you have a virus that can spread easily, like that could be really bad. So I think us as employers making some accommodations and letting everybody know, like, we're trying to protect the whole company here. We're trying to protect everybody's safety. And so if you think you've been exposed, say something so that we can make some accommodations. But there are some CDC questions that you can ask in that way. But naturally, I don't want to present myself as a virus expert or a HR law expert. Both of those could get me in trouble, so I wouldn't do that. Anyhow, well, those are all the questions that we had right now. I'm so happy that Rich was able to join and talk with us. Rich, thank you so much for your time and insight about this. One of the things we hope comes from this is that as a practice or a firm administrator or a leader at your firm, the partners at your firm want to get back up and going as quick as they can. I'm sure, like everybody, unless you're maybe in a couple specific aspects of law, you probably have seen a dip and you're ready to get back to work at more full capacity. We want to help do that. Rich wants to help his clients do that. We want to help our clients do that and help them transition back to what we're going to call a hybrid model. There's going to be people in the office and people working from home, and we want to make that model work. And if there's technology that we can use to help you do that, obviously we want to help you do that. Just as important, we want to help you work through some of these other business challenges, because they're the same things that Rich is solving for his company and that I'm trying to solve for my company. Is how do we take care of our people? How do we come back to work safely? How do we stay productive during something that we didn't really have a plan for? But now we can make a plan. We're ready to make a plan and solve some of the problems of people coming back to work. Leverage your IT folks during this time. They have insight into how your firm can function better, and they're working with many other firms also and gathering information. And so it's a great conduit to share information, through the IT people that you might be working with. And we don't want to be behind the technology curve in this hybrid model where people are at home and people are in the office. We want to stay, right where we need to be for our practice to be successful. So that's just about our time for today. Rich, thanks so much. It was great information for us to share, and thanks for the time you took to prepare and be ready to talk to all of our clients.
No, I really appreciate the opportunity, Douglas. And a good friend of mine was just told me yesterday. He said, the move home was unplanned, but the move back can be planned. And that's one of the main reasons why you and I got together on this call, was to sort of put some thoughts into the heads of legal administrators and partners and associates and anyone associated with a business or a law firm, as far as how can you best plan that move back. Cool. So thank you very much for the opportunity, Douglas. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. All right, everybody stay safe. Have a good day. Appreciate it. Bye.